The respiratory system proper, from the larynx to the small alveoli of the lungs, is a series of tubes. Recall that the basic anatomy of a tube, which was covered in an earlier presentation, consists of a wall comprised of 3 structural layers or tunics. From deep to superficial, there is an internal layer, typically comprised of an epithelial tissue and an associated vascular connective tissue, a middle layer that consists of variable combinations of smooth muscle and connective tissue, and an external layer, typically consisting of a variably thick, dense, irregular, fibroelastic connective tissue. All tubes in the body follow this basic pattern, which we will now apply to the anatomy of the respiratory passageways. Let's begin with an overview of the tubes of the respiratory system proper. This series of air passageways includes the larynx, trachea, main or principal bronchi, lobar bronchi, segmental bronchi, bronchioles, alveolar ducts, alveolar saccules, and the small terminal pulmonary alveoli. These structures form a series of tubes that alternately fill with air from the environment and then return the air back into the environment, and in this process exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with the blood of the pulmonary capillaries. Like all tubes, the respiratory tubes have 3 structural layers, or tunics. Let's begin by examining the basic tunic pattern of the respiratory tubes on both an illustration and an actual photomicrograph. The internal layer of the respiratory tube is named the tunica mucosa, and it has 2 subdivisions. The innermost portion of the mucosa is the epithelial layer, which is a mucus-producing, ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium, which coats the lining of the tubes with mucus throughout the majority of the respiratory system. The mucus helps moisten the tubes and functions as a filter to trap dirt particles from the inhaled air. Beneath the epithelial layer is the submucosal loose vascular connective tissue layer of the mucosa. The middle layer of the tubular wall is named the tunica fibromusculocartilaginea, the longest single word in anatomy. While this name is long and a bit intimidating, it really is a great name because the name describes each of its tissue components. Fibro refers to the fibroelastic connective tissue in the wall. Musculo refers to the smooth muscle found within this layer. And cartilaginea describes the hyaline cartilage that reinforces the middle layer of the wall. If you think about the structural organization of the middle layer, it makes a lot of sense because the last thing you want to have happen to a tube carrying air to the lungs for gas exchange is for the tube to collapse, because it is not possible to move air through a collapsed tube. For this reason, there is a cartilage skeleton in the wall to reinforce it and keep it from collapsing. Note that the cartilages are incomplete rings. This allows the muscle in the wall to contract and deform the cartilages. When the muscles contract, they narrow the tube, and when the muscles relax, the tube once again widens. This adjusts the volume-pressure relationships within the tube to allow for a more efficient airflow. The external layer of the respiratory tube is named the tunica adventitia. This layer is a thin layer of loose to dense irregular connective tissue that distributes the blood vessels to the tube. This, then, is the structural pattern of the respiratory tube, a 3-layered tube. The majority of the respiratory passageways function as conduction tubes to move inspired air into the small terminal dead-end air spaces within the lungs. The conduction tubes have walls modeled after the basic pattern that I just described. But as the tubes project into the lungs and become smaller and more highly branched, modifications appear in the tubular wall. Let's examine the different parts of the respiratory tree and see how it compares to the basic pattern. The initial part of the respiratory system proper is the larynx, or what is often called the voice box. The larynx has the three basic layers seen in the pattern, but it is a complex region. The middle layer consists of 5 interesting shaped cartilages and numerous skeletal muscles that move the cartilages. The mucosa lines and covers the inside of the cartilages and forms a series of folds that vibrate to produce sound. This region will be explored in more detail in another presentation. The trachea and large bronchi are conduction tubes that move air into and out of the lungs. From the large diameter trachea to the smaller diameter segmental bronchi, these tubes exhibit all the features we learned in the basic pattern of the respiratory tube. The major modifications to the tubular pattern occur as the small bronchial tubes branch from the segmental bronchi. These terminal conducting tubes reduce the thickness of the tubular wall. The epithelium thins. The incomplete cartilage rings break into thin plates of cartilage, and eventually these cartilage plates disappear in the terminal end of the bronchioles. The smooth muscle becomes relatively thicker and encircles the tube in spiral bands that reinforce these small tubes. The greatest modifications appear as the bronchioles branch to form the dead-end alveolar system, consisting of alveolar ducts, alveolar saccules, and the pulmonary alveoli. These small passageways lose the external and middle layers completely and have walls comprised of simple squamous epithelium and a thin basement membrane. This extensive branching network of respiratory spaces forms a surface area approximately the size of a handball court. These thin-walled tubes then form the respiratory zone, where they form an intimate relationship with the single-cell thick pulmonary capillaries. This thin pulmonary membrane is the site of gas exchange between the oxygen in the inhaled air in the pulmonary alveoli and the carbon dioxide in the blood of the pulmonary capillaries. So once again, we see a 3-layered tube, which in the case of the respiratory tube is structurally suited for its function as a conduction system and respiratory gas exchange.